Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Not that they can't, but it's just...
Right. Well, and they don't because they've never had to.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you ask students, I've asked them in the past, how many of you know what a syllabus is? And in the way past, they've said, no, nobody knows what a syllabus is. And then I got really surprised a couple years ago when I said, how many of you had a syllabus in high school? And I had a huge showing of hands. However, what that syllabus was from now until the end of, 2 weeks, and we're going to go through. So it wasn't a semester-long syllabus or a year-long syllabus, but at least they've heard of the term now. Michael, did you want to share something?
Oh, it just forces them to read, because they're going to bother the professor with, what does this do? Even if the professor went over it, they're going to email them, because you tell me what to do. So,
yeah, no.
It's a whole, it's a different kind of behaviorist model. That's
No, and you had mentioned.
Well, and it's interesting because if you notice, everything is on a Thursday. I teach math, and I have a quiz every Tuesday. And I get there Tuesday, and I'm like, okay, now we're, and they're like, okay, inevitably, what? We're having quiz every Tuesday. Every Tuesday. So.
Yeah.
Sometimes I still don't get it.
No, I just a kind of note that I give quizzes on the syllabus, like.
What do you teach?
I teach sociology and government.
Oh, okay.
And it's really, common exams in the class. So I was just, I was just thinking about it. It would be useful to
Sure.
thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it sounds too like what you're saying is that what happens on that first day of classes too is they flip through, and what is it that they're looking for on the exam? They're looking, or on the exam, I'm sorry, on the syllabus. And what they're looking for on the syllabus is, what do I have due? What do I have due and when is it due? And there's really not a whole lot of thought put into what do I need to do well then on those things, especially when you see that the first quiz, okay, in math, you're going to have a lot of quizzes. I think they do 13 quizzes and then they drop 7 of them, something like that, in some of our calc classes. But yeah, it's this, what do you do in between there? And that's where when they put the wheelbarrow full of stuff, well, that first day of class, they looked and it's like, there's nothing due for 4 weeks. There's not a thing due for 4 weeks. This is great. They didn't take into account that in 4 weeks, they have a 20% exam coming up or a 15% exam. Somebody else had a hand. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I've done this with some of my tutees, and it helps them put things into perspective with how much students are graded, because some students will freak out about something that's due that's only worth 3% or 5% of their total grade. And it really just puts things back in perspective if you tell them you can completely fail this and still get a 95% in the class overall. It's just putting things back into perspective by how much they're worth, really, if they're a really anxious student, I think it really helps.
Right.
Also, I want to let you know your first.
Because what you're saying, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, too, like this prereqs quiz, if you look at the details, okay, and you do the percentage, it's maybe only worth like 8.3%, but it's a higher stakes quiz because you can't get below a 30 or else you get a 0.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like, trying to highlight for them that, like, okay, this is, you get a little bit more of a percentage for this quiz and another quiz, but the stakes are actually higher than that.
Right. And that you bring up an absolutely wonderful point, because what we find, and this happens in chemistry a lot, because there will be a lot of labs due, and they'll have 10 labs due in the entire semester, and they're each worth 1% of their grade. But labs are something that you can do, right? They can do something. They have to write up their lab. They're doing whatever calculations. They will spend so much time on doing that lab to get that lab in on the same week that they have a test that's worth 15% of their grade, and you're putting all of your time and all of your energy, like you're saying, into this thing that's 1% of your grade overall, as opposed to 15, 20% of your grade. And so you're right, that's something that we have to help direct their attention to when we go through this exercise in study skills with us. Any other observations you guys had in your groups? Yes?
Under the quizzes, it says that the quizzes are meant to gear you for the exam. And I think a lot of students kind of miss that concept, that I should go back, and if I missed anything on the quiz, that's going to show up again on the test.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's another phenomena that I see in study skills with math in particular, and actually the Math 1400. The quizzes are beautiful. The exams are beautiful. I know I am awful at math, but I'm able to take a look when they come in and look at their exam, and then I'll say, let me see your quizzes too, that prepped for, like you're saying, prepped for the exam. And they'll say, you know what, he or she depending on who's, he or she, there was nothing on this quiz that was on the test. There's nothing. This was all brand new information. I don't know anything about calculus, and I'll look and I'll say, well, these look a little bit similar. Well, that's different. There was just one thing changed on there. So again, they're accustomed to getting exactly what it is that's going to be on the test, and that's what their expectation is when they walk into that first exam. Did anybody else have any other comments? Yes?
Homework is not graded.
Homework is not graded. Homework is not graded.
Huge difference.
That is cool. So if you think about high school, remember back in high school, they had so much homework, it was graded. You could, essentially, you could fail major exams in high school, but you could do extra credit. Your homeworks were worth some amounts. You think about it now, if you have 3 or 4 exams and a final, mathematically, I'm going to look at the math person, but mathematically, you fail 2 of those major exams, and you fail however many of your quizzes, there's not a chance that, they'll say, well, a lot of times they'll come into us and say, well, I really want to get an A in this class somewhere around mid-semester. It's like, well, I hope I just get a C. And then when it gets right before the drop date, it's, I just need to pass this class to move on to the next one. So that they have that shift in thinking as well. Or we hope to help them get that shift in thinking. Any other things before we move on? You guys did a great job. So again, what's that? Okay. So again, we talked about, you guys were really good about this. So I'm just, oops. Whoa. Okay. I'm just going to move through this because you covered all of those. So how is it that we talk to them then about, actually the calendar that you have in front of you, we'll go through this exercise with them in study skills, and then what I ask them to do when they get back to their dorm is to promptly rip it apart. I don't want them looking at it, flipping. What I want them to do is pull the calendar apart, put it up somewhere in their room by their computer, whatever it is, January, February, March, April, so when they take a look at it, they see their semester as a whole. A lot of times when you have the flip calendar and you're thinking, oh yeah, I have a test sometime in April. What you don't see is, you flip that page, everything is in the first week of April.
Yeah.
Yes?
Do you do this for all their classes in that study skills?
Yeah,
class?
yep.
In one calendar?
Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah, we'll ask them if they want to meet with us for time management. A lot of times they don't even know what study skills means, but if we want to go ahead and work with, if we know that they're coming in for time management, we'll ask them to bring in a syllabus, bring in all their syllabi. And we'll have them do this exercise sitting right there with us, putting it on. We help them, again, when we were talking about the calculating grade, we'll help them calculate the grade. Or I'll ask one of the tutors to please come in and help them calculate their grade. But yeah, we do this for all of their classes for them. And what we ask them to do is to study, or to look at their study like it's a job. One of the first things I say is this the exact same schedule that you had last semester, whether it was high school or the semester before? And the answer is no. Right? The answer is almost always going to be no. It's not the exact same schedule. And I'll say, okay, well, how long did it take you to get accustomed to your new schedule, finding the building, whatever? They'll say a couple of days, a week, whatever. They carry their schedules around with them. I say, so okay, it's a little hard to get used to this new schedule, right? But you got used to it really fast. If you look at studying that same way and you schedule study time like you would schedule a class, you're less likely to not do that study because you have it scheduled. So again, it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to, but once you have your schedule figured out, you're more likely to keep track of it. So when your friend says, hey, let's go over to the mall and do blah, 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 you can say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do it. However, what I say to them is don't be so rigid with yourself. You can say, all right, I have playtime later, so now I'm going to switch my playtime and my study time, but don't leave it to not do it at all, because that's where they end up with, oh my God, I have an exam tomorrow, I haven't even started studying for it. So we have them think of school as a job. We ask them anytime that they possibly can to use the daytime hours. Any reasoning you guys can think why daytime hours would be the best to study? They're awake, yeah. Everybody's in class, so there's usually less distraction at that time. Plus, there's just that natural vitamin D. Yeah.
And you may touch on this, but I was talking with one of my freshman work study students the other day, and she's like, I just need to get on a routine. And I was like, yeah, you do. And I think studying during the day gets you on a routine. Like you're studying, you're awake, and then you go to bed around the same time. I know that's a lot to ask a lot of first-year students, but if they can generally get in that routine,
Yeah.
The sooner the better, because as soon as they, again, we were talking about kind of developing habits, those habits that they develop in high school, they have a context that constantly reinforces that.
Yeah.
So the sooner that they can kind of get thinking independently about developing those habits and kind of structuring the study time that way. Yeah, I agree. It might be a lot to ask, but I really think what we've seen is that the sooner the students can kind of adapt to their own schedule and really structuring their schedule that way, the better. Definitely.
It's also been my experience that like trying to build in like maybe even a couple of breaks into their schedule, like maybe like having a class and then a period off and then a period on, just because half the time if you just get them up and out of their out of the house basically, then they're like, oh, I've got an hour, so I'll study or I'll do something else, right? But if you don't start their classes until like say 11 o'clock, they won't wake up till like 10:30. They won't use that morning time for anything.
Yeah. Well, I think the important thing too is that they know that, you know, we talked about before, they do a lot of talking about studying, a lot of thinking about studying, and it's almost like you're in that constant, I mean, you probably remember being an undergrad or a graduate student, you know, where you're in that constant state of anxiety when you have stuff to do. But if you just get it out on the paper, and this calendar is really a powerful visual to remind them always, this is what's coming up. And I practice what I preach. And I'm actually a little bit lost with that on my calendar when I don't have it up. But yeah, it's good to get them into that routine. And if you schedule study time, well, then you study when you have scheduled study time, and really you don't have to think about it at other times. You could think about going to the mall or playing on Facebook or whatever it is that they do.
You do have to encourage that, I think, when you schedule study time, that you do have to put away Facebook and put away texting.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Most of my friends in college, they'll have Facebook or something open in the background, and so they'll say, oh, I studied for 10 hours for this test. I studied for 10 hours, but I asked them, like, how much time do you actually spend studying, and how much time is it, oh, I went on Facebook for 10 minutes while I was studying, because it's really distracting time.
And the other thing about that, which reminded me of, you can Google this, it's called the 6-hour D. You can quote unquote the 6-hour D, and basically it talks about this guy who he's studying for organic chemistry, and he's studying for 3 hours, and he gets a D on his organic chemistry test. And he says, well, you know, I'm just going to study a little bit harder next time. And if I study harder, I'll just study twice as much, too. So if I study 6 hours, then I should get double the grade, I'll get a B. Well, he ends up getting a D again. Well, the moral of the story is if you're well, either distracted or using tools that don't fit what it is that you're doing, it doesn't matter how much you continue to study in that same way, you're probably not going to progress. All right, I know that we just have a couple more minutes, but we talked about utilizing the hours in between classes, because that's when there's the least amount of distraction. This study things in the hall or at home that are easy to stop and start basically just means, you know, if you have little bits of chunks here and there to do studying, this would be a great time to do those note cards you like to do. You know, you have 50 note cards to do 2 or 3 of them in between each one of your classes. How do we tell them what to study? I think we've all touched on this, but just to kind of, well, know what strategies would you use? I think we talked about that too, but use the big calendar that we've given to prioritize the tasks. Break down tasks into smaller chunks. Again, if you have 50 problems to do in a week, break it down. Just use your school week of 5 days. Do 10 problems a day. Every time you go back to do more of that work, you have less of it to do if you just break it down into smaller chunks. Study what you hate first, because of course, you know, that's when you have the most energy and you're excited, and then when you're all said and done and tired, you don't have that crappy thing left that you don't like to study. Study the sciences and the foreign languages, those math classes as soon as possible. You know, circle where is it that you might have been a little bit lost, so you can bring your attention right back to that when you do sit down to do that serious study. Again, previewing the class material, that takes 2 minutes. Really, you're sitting down waiting for the instructor to get their stuff out of their bag. All you do is review what you did the last class for a couple of minutes, and then before you get up and run to your next class, just review what you just went over. So, we're just going to skip by all this. And actually, let me mention this. We didn't give you handouts. We didn't want to, well, really, let's just be honest, I didn't make copies of them. But we will, if you want to give us a card, or if you, well, I can take down your names. I would be happy to email the presentation to you, because there are a couple of other tips here at the very end. But again, college context for learning, how it differs from high school too. Infrequent tests, so not as many tests on large quantities of material.